Did you know that there is an orchid genus that is so rare that few have heard of it and even fewer know how to grow it? Well, I managed to get my hands on a couple of tubers and I'm going to share with you what I learned. Hi, I'm Jess. Today we're going to be talking about the Corymbus and Nervilla orchid genus. These orchids are terrestrials, which means they grow on the ground and in the soil, and they are typically found in the forest floor, kind of hidden away. When it comes to terrestrial orchids, the most famous ones that you may know about are the jewel orchids, and these ones are stunning because they have these beautiful veined lightning-like leaves that kind of shimmer when the sun hits it. There are other orchids that are very similar to this, but they are a little bit more elusive. Instead of having a huge rhizome and several leaves growing into a nice bushy foliage sprawling plant, these orchids only grow a single leaf and a single flower stalk every season before they go into dormancy, and then they basically become invisible. The Corymbus and Nervilla orchids are typically found in kind of the Oceania Asian region, and they can grow anywhere from China all the way down to Australia. And there are over 100 different species, but most people have never heard of it, and it's very rare to find in cultivation. There is a small Facebook group about growing Corymbus plants, and they are very dedicated growers to share their knowledge about how to grow these very special, unique orchids. The life cycle of this plant is very seasonal. So for 6 months of the year, they are a dormant tuber hidden underground, which makes it very hard for researchers to find them unless they're looking for them during a specific growing season. When it is springtime, they grow one single solitary heart-shaped leaf, and from that leaf emerges a beautiful flower stalk. These plants are supposedly pollinated by flies and other small flying insects, but it's not determined which exact ones are the pollinators. If the flower is not pollinated, then the flower dies and then the leaf dies back, and the plant itself sends out stolons or runners to propagate themselves, grow a new tuber for the next season, and then the cycle will repeat again. It seems really crazy that these plants can survive with just one single leaf, but that's exactly what they do. And the leaf is what makes it so unique. With the Corymbus, they tend to have these beautiful heart-shaped leaves with veining throughout, very similar to jewel orchids. And in the understory growth of the forest, they're pretty much well camouflaged. But the flowers themselves are also very vibrant, and it has this kind of helmet-shaped look to it. It's something that you really have to see for itself because it is quite stunning. As for the Nervilla, it also has a beautiful heart-shaped leaf with different kind of ridging on top of the leaf itself, so it has a different texture. Some may be kind of ribbed, some of the veining may be a different color from the rest of the leaf, and the flowers are more similar to the jewel orchids in that it has a single stalk with a lot of small tiny flowers emerging from it. That's what differentiates the Nervilla from the Corymbus. So both of these orchid genus are quite different in how they look and feel, but the overall life cycle growth is very similar. I'm going to share with you the basic way to take care of this plant, and hopefully you'll have some success if you can get your hands on these tubers. So first off, when it comes to light, they are understory plants, so they don't need a lot of light. Probably the same as a Phalaenopsis, which is kind of like bright shade. And if you have LED grow lights, then it's perfectly fine and acceptable to use. As for temperatures, it tends to be in the intermediate section, so about 65 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit is probably the range. It likes it a little bit cooler, and it likes high humidity. So these plants definitely like humidity in the 50% or higher, as much as you can give them, and they definitely benefit from that. I think the Corymbus definitely needs the higher humidity. When it comes to media for these plants, I think they're not that picky, but it really depends on whatever species that you use. I've had Nervilla in a 50% soil and perlite mix. I've had them in 100% Kanema, and I had them with a mix of sphagnum moss and soil and perlite, and they all grew quite well in that setup. As for the Corymbus, I think it does better in live sphagnum moss and perlite. Seems to be the great blend. You can have up to 50% of perlite and sphagnum moss, all the way up to 100% sphagnum moss. One thing to note is when you're potting up the tuber, you want it to be just below the soil line. So if you see a new shoot that's coming up, you want it to be just peeking out of the soil. That way it allows it to grow more quickly and it'll still be a nice strong stem. Also, when the tuber is completely dormant when potting, it may be difficult to see where the top point is. So if there is a pointed side to the tuber, then that's going to be the part sticking up. For the Corymbas, it's really small, so most of the time it will figure itself out. You just kind of plant it and it will rearrange itself to grow in the right direction. Because these plants grow pretty fast, you got to keep your eye on that. And the media needs to stay evenly moist all the time. It doesn't really like to dry out, but it doesn't like to be sopping wet either. One of the key things to note is that once the leaves start dying back, you really want to cut off the watering and dry out the media. That way it allows the tuber to really grow and strengthen. Otherwise, if it's too wet, then it's going to rot and then you end up with no plants for the next season. I've definitely experienced that because I've grew them in kind of like a sandwich bag to maintain the high humidity that it needs. But because I didn't let it dry out during the dormant season, the tubers themselves rotted. When the season ends, you keep it dry. And also, once the tuber starts to emerge from the soil and it starts to grow, that's when you start watering as well, so that you want to give enough moisture to the plant to help it survive. If it stays too dry when the tuber is sprouting, then that's also a very vulnerable time for the plant, and it may not grow for the next year. So when it comes to these plants, they're usually propagated by the tubers. So after the growing season, it may produce one more tuber or two or three, and you may end up with more, and it can continue to multiply with every successive season. So if you have the right conditions, then the plant will send up a flower every growing season. If not, then you have to wait for another season. So that is how you take care of the Corymbas and Nervilla, and hopefully that will be a good guidepost for you to start planting these plants. So in my current collection, I have several of these plants. I have a Corymbas acarinitas that I got last year, and unfortunately that plant did not survive because it had rotted. So I'm going to try again, but this time I don't have the Corymbas acarinitas. I wasn't able to get the acarinitas, so instead I got the Gemina gibbus, and I think that one will be a little bit better and easier for me to manage, especially now that I know its life cycle and I can understand a little bit better. I think I will be a little bit more successful with this plant. As for the Nervillias, I tried about 6 different species, but the one that I had the most success with was the Nervillia tranguensis, and that one was able to produce 2 tubers. So for this growing season, I have 2 tubers of the Nervillia tranguensis to try out and grow, and hopefully that one will multiply and be more successful. I haven't been able to get any more Nervillias this year, so my collection has actually shrunk quite a bit. And that's fine because I'm trying to figure out how to grow them. So right now I have about 5 of these plants now. I was able to pick up some of these tubers from the Tarzan group, and it was really exciting to see some of these for sale. These tubers usually go for sale like late winter, early spring, because that's when the tubers are most dormant. If you're interested, you could learn more either on the Facebook group, or you can check out the Tarzan group's growing guide on these plants. So that's it for my growing guide on the Nervillia and Corymbas. If you have any questions, please leave in the comments and I'll try my best to answer them. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and please check out the playlist on growing terrestrials if you want to see more videos like this. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!